Hi, I am Michael Santos with Prison Professors, and I thought I'd share another installment of a letter that I received from federal prison. The previous letter that I started with this series really painted a very bleak picture of life inside of even a minimum security camp when people are surrendering during the COVID pandemic. And this is a follow-up letter that I received from him that I just wanted to share because I think it's important for people to be able to listen and learn of what people are experiencing inside there. So I'm going to mask his name and I'm just going to read from the letter. So you won't see me looking directly at you. I will be looking at my screen so I could read the letter and kind of improvise as we're going along. And here we are. This is a group email to friends and family. I figured it might be interesting to highlight some of the ways I have already found myself in a precarious situation. Number one, there is a commercial-sized garbage bucket filled with ice in the bathroom. I did not notice that there was a brown cup to the side of it. So to give you some perspective, big bucket of ice, right? And next to it, a brown cup. There's a reason for that brown cup, but if you're new to the prison system, you may not know what to do with that brown cup. And that's what unfortunately happened to this young fella. I was walking around nervous to even leave my bed. Why is he nervous to leave his bed? Because it's the quarantine time and he probably has some rules in the prison that you're not allowed to leave. But he's walking around. I figured putting some ice in my cup to make a cold drink with the Gatorade mix I'd purchased at the commissary would be harmless enough. So he proceeded to the bathroom with his cup. Interesting to me to hear that the bucket of ice, is in the bathroom or near the bathroom. So he opened the garbage can and filled his cup with ice. He was thinking, this is simple enough. He said that he was careful not to spill a single ice cube on the floor. He never even once got ice. Never once in his life did he ever go and get ice from the home refrigerator without spilling at least one ice cube. And he offers his wife as testimony to that. Anyways, boy, did I get yelled at by a very large man who was also serving time in the prison. He yelled, "Hey man, don't be sticking that dirty ass cup you be drinking from into that can full of ice that we're all drinking from." My friend says, "I'm sorry, my mistake." So he said, "Well, go dump it out and refill it." So obviously he's talking about dump out the entire garbage can that's filled with ice, dump that out and refill it because now nobody wants to get their ice because he just scooped his own cup into the bucket. So he says it's not a good situation and he'll never make that mistake again. Those of you who went to camp with him, and he's talking now about his time as a child in summer camp. He says, do you remember when someone would ask for a sip of your soda? The person would put the cold can on their forehead to cool himself down. He says, you would get killed for that in here. And I think that that's a little bit of hyperbole. It's important for me to kind of quantify that people who are going into the system sometimes tend to aggravate or magnify the situation or the complexity of problems that they are doing. A lot of times this just takes, the use of good common sense and good critical thinking skills to be able to master this challenge of serving time inside of a prison, even during the pandemic era. So let's continue with his letter. He said, I was sitting on my bed. My bed is next to another very large man. I swear that I am not exaggerating, he says. His name is 15. He got the name 15 because he has been in prison since the age of 15. So my friend says that he was eating oatmeal around 8 o'clock at night. He was terribly bored and hungry, which is a common experience in prison. He said that he was confined to his bed all day and all night. Finally, they let him get up and get some hot water for the oatmeal. He figured that there is no way he could get himself into trouble just eating oatmeal. Well, he was wrong. Many of you know where this is going, he says. He says, I am minding my own business when the large man turned to me with piercing eyes and says, do you know that you're smacking over there? Or your smacking is making me sick. So he's talking about he's eating like this. And my friend says, oh, I'm sorry. And then 15's brother chimed in. Yeah, and you're eating with your damn mouth open. So once again, he has to say, I'm sorry. You see, prison is a lesson in humility. The other guy then says, "Do you not see me getting up and walking away from my bunk every time you eat in your bed?" He says, he says he felt horrible, but this place really humbles a person in the most really disrespectful way, I guess it is, because he's just trying to live. But while he's living, everything that he does influences somebody else, because in prison you are in such close proximity. So he says the guy knew that he was there for a white-collar crime of fraud. He said it's like it's written all over his forehead, but people don't treat him any differently. He's still sharing space with other people in the prison, and he has to learn how to function in that environment. So he continues with his email, giving his friends and family an update of the challenges that he is facing. He says, and this is the hygiene email that he titles this. So he says, "So regarding the two brothers getting on me about my poor eating habits," and he says he's not being sarcastic. They are really blood brothers. You don't want them as enemies. They're not his enemies, he says, and he learns from them about living in prison, but he learns the hard way. He feels small and embarrassed to be a grown man with two daughters and a wife, and yet other men are having to correct him on how he should eat or what the appropriate prison etiquette is. So he says, they tell him, "We don't know how you ate with customers in the business world," they tell him, "because you can't eat like that in here." And then my friend starts to reflect on how his poor table manners probably did influence other people when he was eating outside, but he said he was feeding them so much business and money that they tend to probably overlook it, and he never got called on it. So he says, what a screwed up world he was living in. He'll never act in such poor taste again. He's learning things about living in prison that he thinks are going to help him when he comes home. And but it's still a very humiliating experience for him. So his next hygiene screw up that he names is no one ever told him about prison etiquette concerning use of the bathroom. He says you are never supposed to urinate while standing up, which is a little difficult for a man, of course, because that's how we urinate. He says, I was, of course, yelled at and berated for the way that he peed. And he is copying his prison consultants for not telling him about that service. So apparently at this prison camp, the proper etiquette is to sit down while you pee. And I think that what he's talking about is when you're peeing on a toilet rather than in a urinal stall, of course. I can't imagine how you're sitting down in a urinal stall. But the reason for that, of course, is because it's a sanitary issue, and you don't want the pee splattering on the toilet seat that 500 people have to use. So if you're going to pee in prison on a toilet seat, make sure that you're sitting down on the toilet and not standing up in front of the toilet. And preferably use the urinal rather than the toilet, because bathroom facilities are rather limited in many prisons. So next up on the hygiene agenda, as he said, wet clothes. If you went to camp with him, and he's now talking about summer camp, he said, you were not taught the right way, at least not the right way that people in prison are going to accept. He says, well, in summer camp, he used to play basketball, he'd get all sweaty, and then they'd just throw their wet clothes in the laundry bag, or just hang them over the chair. But while you're in prison, he says, it's like you're living in a fishbowl. Everybody notices everything. And he complains about being yelled at and ridiculed for putting his wet clothes after exercise on his chair. He says the rule of prison etiquette is that every time you get sweaty, you need to wash your clothes immediately. You cannot put them on a chair to dry off, and you cannot just put them into a laundry bag, because the clothes are going to smell. And the other people who are serving time will have a real problem with that. The fact that he never did laundry in his entire life does not minimize his responsibility or exonerate him from problems that can surface inside of the camp. He says in summer camp, he wouldn't even take off his sweaty shirt before going into the lunchroom. But hygiene is really important in prison, whether it's a minimum security camp, low security prison, medium security prison, or high security penitentiary. He also says that you would think that people in prison might be homophobic, But he says it's just the opposite. He talks about walking into the bathroom any time of day, and sometimes he'll see other men shaving each other's backs, their hair, their faces, and so forth. And he's not just talking about glossing over the back with a razor really quickly. He's talking about another man wiping down the guy's back with soapy, wet washcloth, then meticulously shaving his back. He says it's crazy living in prison, far different from what he would have expected. And they also expect you to shower at least twice every day. They expect you to shave your face daily and to get your hair cut once a week. It's a full-time job grooming in prison, and it truly seems ridiculous to my friend. So he says that he had been walking outside with an inmate to exercise on a very hot summer day in South Florida. Then he proceeded directly to the computer room and waited in line for an hour to use the email system. So there's an email system, and I have other videos that talk about the CoreLinks email system, but everybody shares them. And he heard whispers and loud voices behind him as he was waiting his turn in line to use the computer. And he said he turned around, but he realized that the people were really angry and talking about him. And the largest guy in the group said, "It is entirely unsanitary for you to sit in the computer chair that we all use when you're all sweaty like that. You should go shower and come back." And he wonders, what am I supposed to do? Some people may think that he should stand up for himself and gain respect. But he said respect is not a problem for him in there. He works out with a very respected car, meaning the people that are around him, and he's able to keep up. So people notice that he's physically fit, and people leave him alone. But they didn't respect him because of his hygiene habits. And so he did go back to the bathroom. He showered, got back in the back of the line, and then waited to access the computer again. So his last hygiene tip for the day is to never sit on a bed prior to a fresh shower. Most people have, on their bed, they put a large towel that covers their bed so that they don't get on the bed all sweaty or dirty. And they say to never sit on the bed with the sneakers on. That's what he tells us. Never allow your feet to hit the floor at any time, or your socks. You always have to have your flip-flops at the foot of your bed, so that when you get down, you're stepping on flip-flop sandals rather than on the floor itself that everybody walks on. If your feet hit the ground, he said, you can expect to hear about it by some of the other people with whom you're sharing space. So he was literally exhausted after working out one day, and he said he's so tired that he couldn't even stand up. And he lied down on his bed all sweaty. And writing about this now, it sounds obviously stupid, he says. But he did lie down on his bed, and he had the whole dorm talking about him. So he immediately washed all of his bedding, and never, ever would he do that again. So there's a lot of challenges to living in prison, but the more a person knows before he goes in, the more he can be thinking about this and developing the critical thinking skills that are necessary to get through that system without disruption. I think that it was a little different for me during my journey because I served so long that many of the things that he is talking about are like common sense to me. Kind of like you brush your teeth every day and you wash every day, but prisons are a different environment, particularly for somebody who's never been inside. And the more you know, the more effectively you can get through it successfully. And that's why we encourage you to subscribe to the Prison Professors program. You can hit the button right down. We publish at least one video every single day with hopes of helping more people understand the challenges and, more importantly, understand how to come back successfully. And in the show notes below, you will learn where you can get more resources that will help you. We do hope that you will subscribe to the program and support our sponsors at cbdtv.com. Thank you.